Hi. So the social problem or policy I chose to talk about was the legalization of drugs, or whether if we keep the war on drugs as we currently have it the way it is, which one would be a better solution for society. And the first thing to define, though, within this problem is that there's a difference between legalizing drugs and decriminalizing drugs. So, decriminalizing, it would make it legal to possess and to use drugs, but it would make it illegal to grow, make, or sell drugs. So, virtually, it takes all of the criminal aspects of drugs and just puts it on those who sell it, but it doesn't do anything to those who are using it or addicted to it or alike like that. Legalizing drugs, on the other hand, would make everything legal. So whether you just used it, whether you grew it, whether you made it, cut it, sold it, whatever, it would be completely legal. There's no criminal charges. It's not a criminal issue. Or we can just keep things the way it is now, where we have mandatory minimums, where we have drug courts, where we have police officers doing, testing substances on the side of roads, things like that. So, there is some statistics in regards to the current drug, the different sides of both of these issues. So, on the decriminalizing, legalizing side, and I've kind of grouped them together because when data talks about it, they kind of talk about it together. The only difference is usually the end result of what that individual author or writer wants to do. So in this discussion, I've grouped them together. So for statistics for what's going on currently and why it would be good to decriminalize or legalize drugs is right now 1 in 5 people are in prison because of a drug-related crime, which is a huge proportion of people. And then currently we're spending over $40 billion a year on the war on drugs that could be used instead to fund treatment for addictions and preventions and things like that. In fact, one article that I read actually stated that incarcerating an individual costs 5 times more than it would be to put that one individual into treatment for that same amount of time. So that means if someone was put away for 2 years for possessing drugs, you could put that person into treatment for 2 years and still spend less. In addition, having drugs legal, you could tax them and you would make over $50 billion a year. In addition, almost half of all the individuals who are arrested for drug crimes are either Blacks or Latinos, so it has kind of a racial aspect to it, which is another problem within this overarching problem. In addition, if you're arrested and charged for a drug crime, you can lose a multitude of your rights as an American citizen, including owning a gun, voting, you can lose your financial aid to go to college, and you can even be barred from joining the military, the police force, or working in prisons or jails. Now, the statistics of keeping things how it is and the current state of addictions and drugs is, for instance, with marijuana, right now, only 10% of the adults that become addicted to marijuana seek treatment, and they only do that after 10 years of usage. And if you're a child using marijuana and addicted, it actually takes you longer to go seek treatment. Another thing is for the opioid epidemic, because it's hard to say that word. 130 Americans die every single day from overdoses, and that's about 47,000 people a year. Let's see. And then out of the people who abuse opioids, only 5% of them will actually end up using heroin. And then those who use heroin is about 500,000 people every year. And 1 out of 4 people who try heroin will actually become addicted. See, and then when marijuana first became popular to use in America in the 90s, the THC level was only 4%, but now it's over 14%. So so they're growing them, so it's dramatically higher, so that the addiction rate is higher, the effects are higher, and so it's not just this plant that it used to be. See, and then another point is that the current legal drugs that we have in America are already being misused. So, for instance, alcohol. 30 Americans die every single day because of alcohol, and it's actually the fifth highest cause of death. And out of those who abuse alcohol, only 7% of those individuals ever seek treatment. And then another point is that higher rates of drugs and drug usage and drug activities like selling and making and stuff like that corresponds really high with higher rates of crime and higher dangerous neighborhoods. So what would happen if we decriminalize drugs? What do the advocates say? Well, they said that it would reduce the prison population because we wouldn't have as many people going to jail for it, whether it means because it's all legal or whether people who are only using it and not selling it don't have to go. It would also be cheaper for taxpayers because people wouldn't be going to prison, and you could also make money off of it because you could tax it. Since it would be being sold and monitored, drugs would be safer and could be controlled by the FDA. The stigma around drugs would decrease, which would make it easier for those who are addicted to go and get treatment. And then the racial issues revolving around drugs and drug crime and drug usage would ultimately vanish because it's not a criminal issue anymore. If there's any issue with drugs, it's a mental health issue, which people could go seek treatment for. Now, the people who oppose legalizing it and want to keep the status quo, they said that if you legalize drug usage, people are going to more often try drugs because there's not going to be any negative legal repercussions for using them. The more people try drugs, the more people are to be addicted. Remember, the 1 out of 4 people who try heroin become addicted to it. In addition, for drugs being more available for adults means it's also more available for children. And an interesting statistic that I wanted to include in here and not the other one because it kind of fit was that if a child reaches the age of 21 without trying any drugs or alcohol, they're almost likely to never try it. In addition, the status quo advocates say there isn't enough treatment centers right now to handle the current need, and so if you decriminalize it and legalize it, they're not going to be able to handle that need of everybody who would go and try it and get addicted, or the current people who actually would feel like they could go and get treatment. The system for rehabilitation would just break because there's not enough anyway. They also say that there's always going to be a black market to sell the drugs, and those drugs are going to be cheaper and they're going to be dangerous, and it's honestly just going to bury the issue and not actually solve the issue. And finally, there was a really good line in one of the articles that I read. It said, drugs are not dangerous because they are illegal. They are illegal because they are dangerous. And at the end of the day, people who advocate for keeping drugs illegal is that drugs are dangerous. That's just what the science said. They say that they're addictive and they alter your brain, and we should avoid them. So, in talking about that, 2 main topics that advocates for keeping drugs illegal say is that we shouldn't be taking mind-altering drugs. Like with the current legal drugs that we have, like alcohol and tobacco, yes, we can tax them and make money off of them, but there's really not that many treatment centers for them. So there goes the argument that you could use all the taxpayer money to fund treatment centers, and they cause a lot of problems, like personal problems like cancer and secondhand smoke to children and the elderly, and they also cause society problems like DUIs and killing people when you're on the road, and then having the police department to have to run around your town trying to catch all the people who are driving under the influence, breaking into something because they're high, things like that. So if we're not being responsible for our current legal drugs, then we shouldn't be adding more drugs to the list of what we are allowed to do. And then the second thing is that was a big issue that almost every article talked about was drug access for children will increase. And so when it's more available to adults to consume, it becomes more available to children because adults will leave it around the house, or since they think it's okay for them, they'll let their children have it. And since drugs are so addicting already for adults, children are more susceptible for the addiction because they're not fully developed. And drugs have been shown to change the way our brains function and actually grow. It changes our prefrontal cortex, which helps us with decision making, and it changes our ability to remember things like long-term memories, so we can start losing our understanding of how to do things and who we are and what we're supposed to do in society. And it actually physically shrinks our brain and it makes our brain pull away from our brain walls overall. So that's the information about the proponents who say that we should keep drugs illegal, and I will include the references